and we're back with Ladies Trek Library. I'm Kavura, and I'm here with Jen. How are you?
Hey, Kavura. I'm doing good, and it's good to be back.
All right. So this time we read Star Trek Picard, The Last Best Hope by McCormack. And so I'll just read what's on the back and also what's on the inside cover of the book. What's going on, Victor? Everything, said Admiral Borson, is about to change. He turned to his second, Captain Kirsten Clancy, sitting at his right hand, nodded. Leaning forward, she whispered, "The Romulan star is about to go nova." Picard took a moment to consider some of the implications of this statement. As these became overwhelmingly, truly, and purifyingly all-encompassing, he lifted his hand to press his fingertips against the right side of his face, an instinctive action that he had never quite suppressed, to protect where he felt most vulnerable, where he had been most harmed. Then on the inside cover, it says, 15 years ago, you led us out of darkness. You commanded the greatest rescue armada in history. Then, the unimaginable. What did that cost you? Your faith in us, your faith in yourself. Tell us, why did you leave Starfleet, Admiral? Every end has a beginning, and this electrifying novel details the events leading into the new Star Trek TV series, introducing readers to brand new characters featured in the life of Jean-Luc Picard, widely considered to be one of the most popular and recognizable figures in all of science fiction. Okay, so that was the book, and the book came out about, like, after the second episode of the Star Trek Picard series, and of course this book is a prequel to Star Trek Picard. So it takes place right when they found out about the Romulan supernova, and it ends, well, sometime right after the attack on Mars that we know about from short treks. So getting into the book, so what did you think about how Raffi and Picard and their relationship in this book?
Well, a lot of people commenting online that I've seen that have been watching the show, I think didn't like the fact that Raffi calls him JL, and they felt like maybe the relationship was a little too casual. But that didn't really bother me. I think in this book you really get more background on their relationship and what they meant to each other. And she was really, his right-hand man or woman, I guess you would say in this case, through the whole period where he's in charge of the Romulan relief effort. I mean, she really did a lot for him, probably more than he knew about, because she was doing all this work and not wanting to burden him with some of it because she knew he was stressed out. And so they had a really close relationship, which I thought was really a nice relationship, in a lot of ways like his relationship with Riker. So it kind of gave me the same sort of feeling that I had watching Next Generation, the interaction between those two, Picard and Riker, and Picard and Raffi. And her personality reminded me somewhat of Riker too. She's definitely more laid back than Picard for sure.
She was so she's his new number one in this. I like how they so when he talked to Beverly and Picard told him to get someone who will say that he's wrong, someone who will oppose him sometimes when she really does disagree with him. And so and that I think Raffi fills that role pretty well.
We had seen her give a presentation about the Romulan sun going supernova, and he was so impressed with the presentation that he requested her to join the team.
So they had never met before this book, but and all through the book he's saying that he was saying that he did think he made the right decision picking her. She was good for this mission, even though she had problems in the book, which we saw on the show, that the about her family, her own husband and son, and they basically disowned her in this book that had already that happened before the show started, which was sad for her, and it was really something that was one of the big emotional moments in the book.
Yeah, that really, and I will get into this more later. I know we have on the plan about what we're going to talk about, but I think that's one thing that really, reading this book and reading about her relationship with her husband and her son, and how she lost that relationship because she put this mission as her priority, and she was so devoted to it that she left her family behind basically. And she had to, make a choice between the mission and her family. So when you see in the show Picard, the episode where she goes to Free Cloud and tries to see her son, who's now an adult, it really makes that episode a lot more poignant, and knowing the backstory about what happened within the family and why they're estranged.
And she still cusses a lot in the book. So getting on to Girardi and Maddox, I mean, their relationship, which, of course, the thing is, if you hadn't read the book first, then you're watching the show, and then you didn't realize that they had been a couple in the past.
Yeah, and of course, I read this book, only a few of the episodes had been out at that point when I finished the book, and it hadn't even reached the point in the show where you learn that Girardi and Maddox had been in a relationship. So that was actually kind of a surprise for me reading the book. And in the show, even though you do learn that, that they were in a relationship, it doesn't go into a lot of detail about their relationship. So it's really interesting to read it in the book, and you really get a perspective of, their relationship was pretty unhealthy, to say the least.
He was really more concerned about his work. And of course, there's the age difference and everything, and so like how did this love thing happen? I think she loved him more than he loved her.
Yeah, I didn't get the impression that he was that much older than her, because she was already working in Starfleet, but she had gone back to school for like a second degree. So I think there was maybe some age difference, but it wasn't a huge one. But the main issue that I saw with the relationship was that she was starstruck. She knew about his work in him and had sort of had this crush on him before she even met him. And she just, everything he did, she loved. And, he did grow to love her back, but not in the way that she loved him. And for him, I don't think he could ever really love someone more than he loved his work. His work was always going to be the priority. Even when he admitted to himself that he loved her, he couldn't put her above the work.
Exactly. So that's why, in the end, he wound up leaving, and she was devastated. And we still have to talk about the show. So she wound up killing him, and you have to say, well, she was crying when she did it. So I know she didn't want to. She probably did still love him, but it makes you wonder, well, part of it might have been payback, even though, all the other stuff about the synths and everything, and her talk with Commodore O, but she, hated and loved him at the same time, probably by that time.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think, I don't think she would have just killed him out of, anger alone, but I think there definitely was probably an element of that in it. Anger at him for abandoning her. So that probably played into it a bit.
And so the book introduced, a lot of new characters. Any of the characters in particular you wanted to talk about?
There were a lot of really great characters in this book that did not make it onto the show because they either died by the time the book had ended, or they just their storyline doesn't continue with the show. The ones that I really enjoyed reading the most, I would say, was one, the relationship between the Romulan astrophysicist Ritet and Safadi, who was an astrophysicist on Earth. And I
Yeah.
say relationship, even though they never actually met, and they never really even communicated with each other, even though she had written him a letter, and you know, he knew of her work. But, you know, she reached out to him because she also recognized his work, and, you know, she wanted to have someone to confirm her findings about the Romulan supernova. And just seeing from his perspective, you know, where he's living in this oppressive state where, you know, it really was like giving you a glimpse into life in the Romulan Empire for this scientist who doesn't want anything to do with politics. He only wants to do his science and find his, you know, tell the truth about science. But everything is censored. Nobody knows what anyone else is doing. You can't trust anyone else. The scientist working next to you is probably a spy. And it was very much like 1984, if you've ever read that book. And I just thought that was great that the author included that bit about what life was like for this scientist on Romulus at the time.
And I also kind of thought that the Romulan scientist, well, in some ways was similar to Maddox, because they were both scientists who were so much into their work. They really wanted to be left alone just so they could do their work and nothing else. And that's, you know, he was driven like that.
Yeah, he was. Although I think he didn't. I think Maddox had a little bit of more of the mad scientist element in him. I think Vertet wasn't really a mad scientist, but he was so obsessed with his work to the point where he didn't recognize other things happening around him. He didn't really interact well with other people, you know, in society. I guess the stereotype of the awkward scientist, because he's introverted. But there were some parallels to him and Bruce Maddox, and, you know, it's a really sad story. What happens to him in the end is that he, you know, ends up being tortured to the point where he can't really even recognize reality anymore. And when it's time to evacuate Romulus, he gets left behind because he just can't accept that something is happening, that, you know, that the government could be lying about what's happening.
Yes. But also, like you said about Safadi and Grutet, they're, you know, it was great the way it was written, because it's so poignant the way the two of them, they kind of worshipped and admired each other from afar and never got to meet. That's just, you know, it's almost a love story, but they weren't really in love, but they just admired each other's work so much. I love that.
Yeah, it was. It was in many ways like a love story, but the two people never actually got to meet or communicate, just admired each other from afar. And that was really neat to see the different perspectives there. And then I guess the other minor character that I really thought was, I loved, maybe love to hate, it's a better way to phrase it, was Quest, who was the politician from one of the Federation outworlds who sort of decides to be a thorn in Picard's side. And, you know, I think the author wrote her so well, and it brought to mind so many politicians that we all know now. Someone who is this, you know, sort of petty person who really uses the excuse that they're working for the good of their own people and that they want to help their own people, when really it's more about them getting into power and getting control, and, you know, taking every opportunity that she could to try to sabotage the Romulan rescue effort.
And so that's right. And I hadn't, you know, like I didn't think about it until you just said it. So she was a lot like the Romulan politicians. I mean, being very selfish and wanting her own power.
Yeah, you know, I didn't think of it till you said it either. I didn't, but I think that the author was drawing parallels there. Of course, I don't think she was quite, you know, she certainly wasn't evil to the level of where we see the Romulan senator who's basically going to let his own people die at the end. You know, she doesn't have ill will. She doesn't want to see people die, but she's sort of blinded by her own, you know, desire for power. where she's willing to just sort of be a thorn in everyone's side and make everything about her and what she wants.
But I do think she really does care about her people. I mean, she does want something for herself, but she really did care. So she wasn't all bad. And then it turned out that she did have her own rise to power. So I mean, the people did start trusting her. She was named Quest. She had her own quest in the book.
No, that's true. She did have a quest. I never even make the connection between her name. Although I don't know that I totally agree that she cared. I think maybe in the beginning she started out with, yeah, you know what, my people, we have some legitimate gripes, and I want to bring this to the attention of the Federation. We're on this outlying planet which has few resources, and why are we not getting the resources that we need when the Federation is channeling all this money into rescuing Romulans who are our enemies? But I sort of felt like eventually it really became less and less about her caring about her people, that was just sort of had just become an excuse, and it really was more about her wanting, power and wanting things for herself and less about her people. That's just how I took it.
And so also I wanted to mention the Romulan Theorem that was the governor on the planet that they went to, and he was the one that had the giant maze in front of his mansion. And you know how the other Romulan said he's mad. But I just loved all the scenes with Theorem, with the giant maze that Picard and T'Juve had to go through, and then they're staying in his mansion. It was just a fun scene to read about.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading that too, and reading that about the maze getting into his mansion and just talking to himself. It really made me think about the fact that, the Romulans that's not their name for themselves, but the, humans gave them that name after the Roman Empire. And he really seemed a lot to me like a wealthy, Roman senator of the time, and his, eccentricities. And he was a really interesting character too. And like many of the other characters in this book, he was someone who, we can see politicians or prominent people in the world today who he reminds you of. He was someone who was very wealthy and powerful, but was completely, unwilling to accept the reality of what was happening around him. All these environmental disasters are happening, and he's just in complete denial, to the point where he's in so much denial that he's, willing to let all the people that live in his province die because he just can't, one, believe that, the reality of what's happening, and two, is not going to let the Federation help him or anyone else.
Yeah, it looked like he was willing to die too, or he was just so insane that he didn't even think about that. And the fact that he kept his own people in the dark. I mean, they kind of knew something was going on just from hearing things, but he kept them from hearing the real news service where they could learn what was going on and if they needed to be evacuated.
Yeah, another aspect of the Romulan culture, just like Ritet experienced on Romulus. Now, this senator was not on Romulus, but another, I can't remember the name of the planet, a planet close to Romulus in the Romulan Empire. But, the same thing. He basically had his people living in censorship. He had censored all the news channels so that they couldn't, learn anything about the truth. Keep them completely in the dark about the reality of what was happening.
And also, I liked the the sub-praetor that was on the Verity, that when they went to the first planet that they went to for this mission, and the sub-praetor was, of course, he was real snotty and everything. But then, and in the end, when they found out, like, they had to drop him off at this planet where they knew the living conditions would be bad. And Picard tried. He said, like, can we give these people more food and water and not have them living in these muddy tents and everything? And somehow, his name was Suvim. I see it now. Sub-Praetor Suvim. And when he finally beamed down, I mean, he had to just go ahead and let his people go down to that planet where they would just be poor and be submissive to the governors there. And he just, when he said, like, I curse you, Picard, and it says, Picard watched the sub-crater crumble. I mean, that was really sad. I mean, and this proud Romulan, and you can understand his position, like, it was something he had to do, but I mean, of course he didn't want to, but there was no choice, and he did it. He just took his fate in the end.
Yeah, I mean, that Picard and, some of the other characters in the book, they're all, like, over and over again faced with a lot of these, like, impossible choices. I mean, Picard is responsible for relocating these Romulans down to another planet that's supposed to be safer. And when they're promised that it's going to be like home and, they're going to, have a house. And he realizes when they arrive that the conditions are horrible, that the Romulans really haven't done anything to care for their own people. People are living in tents and there's, military guards. It's basically like they're living in prison camps. And, Picard doesn't want to take these people that he's rescued and put them there, but he doesn't really have a choice because they're not his people. The Romulans, are telling him he has to do this. And if he, tries to defy them, he could start a war with the Romulans. So he's sort of, his hands are tied, and it's just a horrible position to be in. And that sort of happened again and again, where he really wanted to do the right thing, but was unable to do so for different reasons.
I mean, he has to look at the big picture. I mean, like, he's saving lives. I mean, at least these people are alive, which, I don't know, you'd almost think that might be worse than death to some people, but we're still thinking at least they're alive. At least he did save them from the supernova.
Yeah, I mean, and then, of course, later on in the story, he's, and actually in this situation, it was written exactly how you expect Picard to react, but I didn't agree with him, and that's when he goes to Nimbus 3, and this is a situation where the inhabitants do not want to evacuate, and I really thought at this point, there were so many people that had to be evacuated, they knew that they weren't going to have time to save them all, and that he should have said, if they don't want to leave their homes, let them stay, but he didn't want to do that. He knew that they were going to die, and because they refused, they ended up being killed by the Tal Shiar. So that was another horrible thing that Picard had to experience. He's trying to do the right thing, and he has to sort of stand by while the Tal Shiar kill these people, and he can't do anything because if he tries to interfere, his ship would probably get destroyed.
Yeah, that was one of the big turning points in the book. I mean, that one happened right after the scene where he met the Kuat Malat, and everything worked out so well there. So he was hoping the next assignment would also work out well. But then they had where the Tal Shiar killed all those people on Nimbus 3. And then that was also when the Bajoran officer decided to resign. And and I felt for her too, because you understand her position. She did not like that, and she had lived through a lot with the Cardassians. That was another thing in the book. They drew a lot of parallels with the situation with the Cardassians because they had to be rebuilt as well, but they accepted the help from the Federation a little more than the Romulans are.
Right. Yeah, this was, probably a worse situation because, at least in the novel verse, when you've read about the rebuilding of Cardassia, the Cardassians, even though they don't really like the Federation, they're pretty much willing to accept help in rebuilding because they don't really have a choice. And here we're seeing where the Romulans, their society is so secretive and they distrust the Federation so much that they're just willing to let their own people die rather than accept aid. It's pretty awful.
And so that brings us to the next point. How does the book help you enjoy, like what you saw on the series, or did the book add to the series?
I'm really glad that the book came out when it did. It would have been better maybe even if it came out before the series, but it came out early enough in the series that, if you read it right away, it was helpful. I almost feel like if I had just seen the show and not read the book, there's so many questions I had watching the show that were unanswered, and that still never got answered in the course of the show itself, that this book answers. So many things that, I mean, we could talk about them for a long time, but one thing that we see, which is only sort of touched on briefly, a lot of people were asking online who had seen the show but not read the book about the situation with Elnor, and the show doesn't give much background on information on as far as what happened with his people, and in the book you understand that Picard sort of doesn't have a choice but to leave, and he can't go back, and that really clears up a lot of things, I thought, and a whole lot about the situation on Mars and why the synths were created, which isn't addressed in the show, which I thought really would have been helpful in understanding the show more. And then most importantly, in the book, we really see, and before I even read the book, one of my main questions watching the show is, it just didn't make sense to me that the Federation would just accept, oh yeah, the synths went rogue and they killed people and now we're banning them and that's it. And there's, nobody questioned, oh, they just went rogue. It seemed pretty clear to me that they wouldn't just go rogue, that there had to be sort of some malevolence behind that. Somebody was responsible. And I kept asking myself that as I was watching the show. And in the book, we see that Raffi, she also questions this, and she really feels like there's something more to it. But in the book, she's viewed as sort of a fringe conspiracy theorist. And that's one of the reasons that she loses her family and her job and ends up, suffering from addiction, is because people don't believe her. And you really got to see that in the book, the whole background of what happened. And you just don't see that in the show. And I felt like it adds so much and explains so much reading the book.
Yeah, there was a lot more in the book. Of course, I don't feel like you have to read the book to enjoy the series, but yeah, it does help knowing all of the background stuff. I like that at the book, first of all, like the book had Geordi. We found out he was there on Mars, working with the synths and helping build the ships. And the book also had Spock, because that was something I had wondered watching the show. Like, did Spock ever get off Romulus? Because that was the last we saw of him. Oh, except, of course, he did go to he went to the Kelvin timeline. That was the actual Prime Universe Spock that went to the Kelvin timeline. But in this book, I do like that he got off Romulus in time before the supernova. So they at least had him. It was great to see him, like, in one scene in the book.
Yeah, and we didn't really touch on Geordi at all. And, of course, I really felt like Geordi was missing, along with some other characters from the series. Geordi's not in the Picard series, but he does play a pretty large role in the book, heading the mission on Mars to build all these synths who will then be building, he's not building the synths, that's a side project that's being run by some other people, but he's sort of in charge of the whole thing, that the synths will then be building the ships that they're going to need to evacuate all the Romulans. And you get to see his interactions with Mackenzie, who is sort of the head person underneath him, and it really gave a lot of background, and I really enjoyed seeing him there. So it's a shame he didn't make it into the show.
Yeah, that's true. And I like how it showed the other Federation. Well, as we talked about Quest, and we find out what's going on more of the Federation. On the show when Clancy did say that they had 14 planets ready to leave the United Federation of Planets, and here, all through the book, you see more of that about how the other planets were just. A lot of them were upset about Starfleet using so many resources to help the Romulans, and some of these other planets needed help too. They needed replicators and everything. They needed more of the food and transportation going to their planets, but it had to be cut down for them so that the Romulans could be helped. And you just see it more a lot here, how Clancy was so she was in this situation. She was trying to help Picard, but then also she was in the place where she was she was up against a lot of stuff going on with Quest and all the council and everybody that she had to deal with. So I like how the book expanded on that. And the fact that how Clancy was so at odds with Picard. I mean, and Picard said this in the book. He felt like he was misaligned with her, like maybe he didn't quite understand her.
Yeah, I mean, and of course in the show we really get the impression that she's just really, if you're a fan of Picard, you probably don't like her because she just, her and Picard just don't get along so well. But in the book, a lot more of that is explained. I mean, I still don't think she's a pretty, maybe I don't like her personality or her character, but you do get more background as to what's happening because Picard's out there, far away from Earth and Federation, inner planets, and doesn't really know what she's up against dealing with people like Quest and these other disgruntled Federation citizens who are angry that so much money is going to help the Romulans, who are their enemies when, they need things at home. And really, he's kind of oblivious to all that, so he doesn't understand what she's having to deal with. So it makes her position a little more understandable.
I think it's interesting how she was a captain in this book, and then by the time of the series, she's the commander in chief of Starfleet. So she's the one who rose up, and all we know that she has done is help with this with the whole Romulan evacuation, and then having to put a stop to it. And so it makes you wonder is it because of stopping the help to the Romulans that she actually was able to rise through Starfleet?
Yeah, I did not consider that, but that's a good question to ask.
Yeah, because she's, or maybe she was just the only one left. I don't know, but yeah, it is because she was a captain and now she's an admiral. Anything else in the book? Any other thoughts?
Well, I would just like to say, in addition to the fact that what I already mentioned about how I really think it complements the show and provides so much background for the series, is one thing that I loved about it is that it had so much that's relevant to what's happening in the world now. So many things you could read that and be like, oh, I know exactly what politician she's talking about. And maybe she's not talking about the person you think. She's in the UK, so maybe she's not, I'm probably thinking of an American politician. Maybe she had somebody over there in mind. But I think anybody can see some of these themes throughout the book. And, that's one of the things that's great about Star Trek is how it brings these relevant themes forward. And not to say that, but some of the books don't do that. Some of the books are more focused on, on certain other things. I think this, more than any book that I've read in a long time, any Star Trek book, really brought forward a lot of themes and issues that we're facing today, which I just thought was great.
Yeah, Star Trek has always been like that. I mean, yeah, so much of it is relevant to the times or things that are that have just recently happened. And I believe that this one, there was supposed to be in the Picard series, a lot of it was supposed to be similar to Rex. But for this, since this book was supposed to happen before the series, I mean, one problem, like prequel books, it has to end a certain way. But I don't think that really took anything away from it. It was still a good book to read. I mean.
No, I agree. Yeah, and not all books are like this, but this one was, even though I knew how the ending was going to be, the journey was so interesting and the characters so interesting that I just kept wanting to read more and more. And this is definitely one of my favorites that I've read recently.
I can't say I really wanted to keep reading it all the time. Well, one of the things was the book changes scenes a lot because there's so much happening in this book. So even like within one chapter, it goes to, like, there's Picard on the USS Verity, and then it goes to Okinawa at the Daystrom Institute, and then it goes to Starfleet Command. There's a lot of switching back and forth, and I guess it was I thought that was a little much, the way it only spent a few pages on each scene. But not that it wasn't a good book, but that was a little jarring to me.
It does have a lot of different characters and scenes. It does go back and forth. That's true.
but I kind of enjoyed that. So I guess it just depends on whether that's your style or not. It might not appeal to everyone.
And I have to say, I still want to know more about how the Vulcans feel about the whole thing, because they didn't mention them in the book or on the series. Maybe in season 2 they will. But you know, the cousins of the Romulans, and how do they feel, and what's their involvement?
You know, they were glaringly absent in this book. I mean, the majority of the characters here were human. We did have, there was the Bajoran person aboard Picard's ship, the Verity, and of course they had some Romulan characters, but I can't remember that there was even a single Vulcan character in there, and I don't really recall a lot of other aliens either. So yeah, that is an interesting question to ask. Where were some of the other species during this evacuation, and what were they doing, and what were their thoughts?
Yeah, there was just talk about some of the other planets. So it ended with Picard back at the vineyard, and he said someone gave him the dog, number 1, right? It's interesting too that the way it ended, it seemed like Picard was at peace, and I guess he was for a while. He probably stayed there at his home in France, and then it was probably years later that he started getting more restless and wanted to go back out into space.
Yeah, I don't know that he was at peace. I think, I really felt like his resignation was kind of a bluff, the way that I read it. That he did not expect them to say, okay, well, just resign then. But they let him resign. And I think he was so angry with the Federation's behavior that probably the anger kept him going for a while, where he didn't, but then after he had he'd been sitting in his house for a while and had time to think about it, and the anger subsided, then he probably started thinking, well, maybe my decision was too rash, and I should have really thought about the fact that I'm not going to be content spending the rest of my life here.
Yeah, he probably did regret it, and I do think it was a bluff when he said, I'll just resign, but he just didn't know how serious they were at the time, that they really had to just disband the whole mission. So
the other one thing I would add too is that I wonder if we'll see this in future novels or in the series as it continues. I thought that we would get some background onto how he met Laris and Jabon, the 2 Romulans that live and work with him in France.
Yeah,
but we didn't.
Yeah, that was actually covered in the comic books. There was a 3-series comic that led up to this too. So in the comics that actually explained how he met them. It was on a planet, and they were there. They were sort of the leaders there, and it turned out they were Tal Shiar, and they were actually against what the Romulans had been doing, oppressing the people on the planet, and they were actually working on a planet that was similar to a wine vineyard. So they knew about wine and everything, and that's how Picard asked him to come be with him on his vineyard. So it was, yeah. So I guess they left that part for the comics.
Oh, I see.
I guess that's it. Any other thoughts?
No, I just stick with what I said before. I think it's a great story, and I highly recommend it.
Yes, I think it was a good book to tell the story of what happened before you watch the show, or even after you watch it. So it was definitely a good book, and I've always liked Una McCormack.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.